Welcome everyone, Costin here with my campaign overview guide for Irsu, for Total War Pharaoh, the bringer of the end times, the one who wants to bring civilization to its knees. Or at least that's what he wants you to think with regards to his campaign plan. In reality, Irsu is in such a position on the campaign map, in terms of territory, in terms of units, in terms of faction potential, that he can bring about a prosperity unlike the world has ever seen in its history. It's kind of like the Archeon situation in Warhammer 3, where you think he wants to bring about the end of civilization, but really Archeon secretly wants to unify all of civilization. And that's the kind of situation that Irsu is in. There are reasons behind this. One, he starts in a very safe starting position. While it's not completely safe from the Sea People's invasion, because they will spawn at sea and make their way into your territory, you do start with the province with 4 regions, good amount of resources, good amount of faction potential, and you can benefit from either prosperity or civilization collapse. Looking at the faction summary, he gets the forced labor compound, so he can increase production of all resources by 50% in every single region, while coming at the cost of happiness. Oh, so you might get a couple of rebellions. Not really a big deal. But this gives him a significant amount of late game potential. He gets the war camp, which gives him recruitment slots, recruitment rank, and post-battle loot faction-wide, which stacks. Yes, this is quite strong. And then he gets a building that would be great if you could build more than one of them, but you can't. So you get Irsu's Gold Tally Quarters, which gives you legitimacy, happiness, influence, and production of all resources by 30%. Now, in terms of faction units, he does have some fairly solid units, unlike the Sabu Nagib warriors that are a tier 3 unit, and he also gets the two-handed warriors, two-handed axe warriors, which are quite heavily armored at tier 5. There are other units you do have access to, but Irsu does have a fairly strong and solid army, which you might not necessarily expect by default, but he does actually have it. Now, in terms of his commands, this is where it gets interesting. So, your active command, the one you can activate outside of Shemsuhor, will cause your armies to wreak havoc, decreasing civilization state and having access to the same benefits as nomadic people that they get from low values if civilization is starting to collapse. You will not be able to occupy settlements until Shemsuhor. Now, this is not really a significant issue because you can still loot and occupy settlements. I think the intent behind Irsu, by the way, I'm pretty certain about it, was that they originally wanted to design him as a horde faction, but then they decided to give him territory. Now, if you wait until Shemsuhor, and this is the interesting bit, your faction will gain more resources from raiding stands and sacking during the current Shemsuhor cycle. So, if you activate it and civilization is collapsing, and you can help with that, what you do is get significant army benefits and losing the downsides. Because if civilization is in crisis, if it's in collapse, then what ends up happening in a campaign is your army starts suffering while the sea people and desert nomads get stronger. But as Irsu, you can nullify the downsides and get army benefits. Your army realistically can be the strongest army on the campaign map, just because of those kind of benefits that you do have. Or you can not engage in that system and just simply get the extra income from sacking and looting settlements. Now, when it comes to sacking and looting settlements, we need to talk about this. So, he is going to have a settlement battle as the first one. Now, if you sack a settlement, you get food, bronze, and a bit of gold generally, and a bit of replenishment. Now, what's important to mention here is that you can still occupy the settlement you just sacked. While it will be damaged, you will still gain the workforce, and that is the important thing to keep in mind when it comes to Irsu, because you can sack settlements, get a significant amount of money as a result of sacking those settlements, and then just turn around and take over those settlements, get the workforce to build them. Now, this is Not something I would recommend you do in provincial capitals like Damascus. You want to take Damascus as is, but when it comes to minor, when it comes to minor settlements, there is no reason whatsoever why you wouldn't want to do this. In fact, there's every reason why you would want to do this and gain a significant amount of resources in the process. In terms of titles, your titles reduce your faction happiness in exchange for various bonuses. Your armies can cause fear on enemy units, and you gain more loot from winning battles, especially sieges. So if we look at the titles that Irsu does have available, he gets the Clenched Fist, so he can prevent the enemy from retreating if he attacks them, but he cannot retreat if he is attacked. Keep in mind, it's only if he is attacked. He does get the Lord of Ruin, which increases battle loot by 100% at the cost of 4 happiness, but this is not really a problem because you don't want to move your army outside the province you just took as quickly as possible. And hey, if you get a rebellion before that happens, that's not really a downside. Irsu may get a significant number of rebellions in his campaign, far more so than anyone else, because if you activate the command, you will be causing a significant amount of happiness issues, but it's not really too big of a deal. You do get Hearts of Stone for upkeep minus 20% at the cost of 4 happiness, as well as various other benefits like Glorious Devastators, like building damage is increased by 50%, but you do gain more resources to raising a settlement by 250%. So you can gain a significant amount of money, you can get movement on land and sea, and units do start fresh in a battle. You can initiate battles on the march, so you have a lot of campaign flexibility with Irsu, which gives him a significant amount of power. Like, you can run around the campaign map far easier than anyone else and gain territory, or just raise it to the ground if you so decide. Now, here's what makes Irsu so crazy when it comes to his faction potential. One, there is a gold mine over here. It starts in the Damascus province. There is a gold mine over here in Jawa, and typically speaking, what I've seen in camp is, like, just out resolving this battle, is that the enemy won't start building an army in Damascus. They'll start building an army in Jawa, which allows you, by the way, to go lay siege to Damascus, take quickly as a tier 3 settlement, and then go, sack and occupy Jawa. And then the fun begins, because you have a lot of potential. You can go over here to Gubla and take it over, sack it if you will, but then sell it to Bay to get an alliance with Bay. You can go over here to Saka and take out the faction that they might end up at war with, which are these fellows right here. Make a military alliance and later on a vassalization agreement. Your northern border is generally secured. The factions that are here to the north are not really going to attack you. You can make an alliance with Bay. You can take Kadesh, because that will give you bronze. So you've got food, 2 provinces with food, you've got gold, you've got bronze. You will be lacking in stone and wood, but hey, funnily enough, stone and wood are readily available also over here in the Shesem province. And you can always trade it. Like, having gold as a start in your starting province is an enormous benefit in this game. Because you can trade gold for other resources. You don't really need a whole lot of gold until later on in the campaign. So being able to trade it away for stone, for wood, all that, is going to be a significant benefit. And hey, you can get access to wood over here in Saka if you so desire. You can wipe them out. Though there are benefits in terms of getting vassals, military alliances. Now, here's an interesting thing to mention about Canaan. So first off, they get Canaanite Perseverance, which gives them an uncommon ancillary chance of 15%. This is probably one of the first things you want to get. However, one of the things you do want to get relatively quickly is First Among Equals. Because what this will do is, for every defensive, military alliance, and vassals, keep that in mind, you will gain +8 legitimacy. So Irsu and Bay are in the situation where getting that kind of research will make them a legitimacy powerhouse without having to own territory, either Egypt or Hatti. Now, you can go for either. Now, which one you decide to go for is your choice. Like, if you decide to go for Hatti, then yeah, you expand to the north, you take these provinces. But you should probably take Kadesh and then Gubla to give it to Bay. Get that military alliance with him. If you decide to go for Egypt, then yes, going to the south, taking all of this territory for yourself, maybe getting some vassals, military alliances along the way is a good idea. Now, in terms of contesting the throne, you can, as I said, you can go for either Hatti or Egypt. You either need to control sacred land, or you can pay 1,000 gold. You can bribe your way, basically. You can pay 1,000 gold to get access to it. I would recommend paying the gold. The reason I would recommend paying the gold is, like, you don't want to rush for Ramesses' province, and he's going to take it very quickly in his campaign either way. You don't want to rush for Ramesses' province, but you do want to have access to the throne of Egypt. I think Egypt is easier to get access to than Hatti. Like, Hatti does have a bunch of sacred lands, but, like, overall, like, it's easier than having to contest the throne of Hatti, because then you'll have to probably fight both Kurunta and Shupoluma, which is not necessarily an easy task. It is a harder choice. It is doable, but you're probably not going to win the first civil war in Hatti, whenever that does take place. Though, keep in mind, the civil war in Egypt is going to kick off, generally speaking, earlier than the civil war in Hatti, so you have more time to set yourself up in Hatti than you do in Egypt. But at the same time, you won't get access to power of the crown, you won't be able to contest the throne, which means you won't be able to get vassals. And getting vassals is a significant benefit, because if you have military alliance and you have split provincial control, then you're not going to be able to use commandments. That's not the case with vassals. Maybe it should be the case with military alliances that you can split that control, but all the same. In terms of units, you do start with the Tier 2 barracks, and the unit you do want to recruit pretty much early on are the Haribo Raiders. Light units, but you can get access to the Shasu warriors relatively quickly. You just need to get the stone and the wood in order to do so, and once you take Damascus, you can start getting your proper units. Also, once you take Kadesh, you will get access to sellswords, spearmen, armored Canaanite units, so you will have an army that is, like, your base army is going to be a glass cannon army, but you can get access to some durability as well, which is going to be pretty useful. And you'll also gain a lot of legitimacy without even having to control sacred lands, because of the military alliance, defensive alliance, and vassal benefit that Canaan has. It is an enormous benefit that does help you out as well. You just kind of need to rush for either Hatti or Egypt to really take advantage of it, and you need to set up those military alliances as well in a campaign. Your economy is solid. It's not the best in the world. It's not the best economy in the game, but it's certainly a solid enough economy that can and will get the job done. You do lack, like, a lot of the tier 3 buildings you might get otherwise, so you will be reliant on sacking settlements, which is fine, because Irsu gets that significant benefit when it comes to sacking settlements regardless. So yeah, your campaign plan is either taking all of this territory. My recommendation is, if you're going south, get the second gold mine over here in Hathor before you start dealing with Ramesses. So, like, all of these provinces over here, or parts of these provinces, should be yours for a taking. It will slow you down in terms of legitimacy gain, but even if you don't win the first civil war, that's not necessarily a significant downside. You can always go for a second one, just as long as you contest the first civil war. That's the important bit, because that's something that will give you, at least for the duration of Civil War, access to the ability of vassalizing other factions. And how would this work in the long term? And also, just keep in mind Cyprus, because Cyprus has the most bronze of any province in the game, like, because all the settlements are bronze settlements, so you're going to gain a ridiculous amount of bronze, which will be useful in maintaining a lot of armies, but of course the sea peoples are going to constantly harass you there if you do decide to take it. But you do have a lot of movement reach. Now, how does this actually look on the campaign map? Well, let me just load a save over here. Yes, I do have a campaign, a long campaign as Irsu that is quite ridiculous. Though, granted, I do play with campaign customization that gives me more resources, lower upkeep, easier diplomacy. I go with the easier diplomacy because a lot of times when the sea people invade, it's pretty annoying. But looking at the situation that you do have over here, like, this is a turn 22 campaign, and I've already got 66 legitimacy, and that's because of the various agreements that I've made with factions. Yes, this is certainly abusing the diplomacy situation, but it does work. Though I don't think it's necessarily worth vassalizing Cyprus. They seem to not work at all. Like this army has not moved at all in this entire campaign. But I've gotten some vassals in the north. I've gotten some vassals in, or one ally in the south. I've made Bay my vassal, so I am gaining a significant amount of legitimacy over here. From like 32 is gained from royal decrees. Though I also have monuments, and I also am getting quite a few from battles. You can build a monument in you can build one monument per province that gives you a legitimacy. Don't forget that. That's why controlling quite a few provinces is going to be important. Now you might think, oh, Irsu's not going to win this battle. It's like, he won't be able to win outright, but he certainly will win this battle, because like my secondary army over here is going to march to support him over there. Okay, now if you're going for Hati, in terms of ancient legacies, the one you want is to go for the one that gives you instant construction, because that's an enormous benefit. Instant construction for free, rather. If you go for Egypt, you can either go with the merchant, you can go for a 10 to get the power of a 10. Like, either going for the merchant for all the benefits that the merchant does provide, like all these lovely, lovely resources that the merchant will provide you, is generally speaking a really good choice.
All envy my strength.
Is generally speaking a really good choice. A 10 is more of a long-term benefit, but especially because you start very far away. You can always go for other things, like if you want to spice up your campaign if you so decide. But generally speaking, I would say either a 10 or the merchant are the better choices. Now, in terms of army recruitment, like, yeah, once you... in terms of army recruitment, what you want what you want to get access to over here are like, yeah, the Nagib warriors, Nagib swordsmen potentially as well. Those will play a role. So I would get the Shabu Nagib barracks and then residence. I would not bother with infantry housing until you can get it at tier 5. Like at tier 2, rather at tier 1, it's absolutely not worth it, because the units are just light units that are glass cannons, and you already have enough of those. But once at tier 5, these units, the axe and shield infantry of the king, the two-handed axe infantry, the sword and shield infantry, those are significantly better units, and that's your late game army. So what would I do in this campaign? Yeah, I'm gonna go for against, well, apparently Ramesses has effectively been wiped out, or he suffered significant drawbacks. It does happen, and I've seen Ramesses in quite a few campaigns not taking Azati for whatever reason. Sometimes, I think the way they've done faction potential is that they've randomized it in here, as well as how they did it in Warhammer 3 recently, where which factions become strongest is randomized in the campaign. So in this case, like, it seems Ramesses got the short end of the stick in this campaign, and he's basically down to his capital. No worries, we'll turn that around and turn that situation in his favor. Now, in terms of research, once you get the legitimacy benefit, I would probably recommend getting knowledge of the Proud for diplomatic relations with Egypt, so basically all of this. And then, yeah, getting God slots, if you're not going for a 10, is generally speaking a great choice as well. But getting diplomatic relations with Egypt, or with the Hittites, if you're going to go for them, you can always get diplomatic relations with everyone else that's not Egyptian or Hittite, like Canaanites, nomadic Canaanite, well, both the Canaanite factions, basically, in order to improve your situation there. Ambition slots are always great to have, always very useful to have. Like, if you're playing a campaign with default settings, you pretty much want to rush the first among equals in a campaign, because otherwise your campaign progress is going to be significantly slower. Keep in mind the legitimacy aspect. You do get some benefits. You get, you know, the Hall of Records, which can give you a significant amount of legitimacy if you so decide, instead of just relying on the Newscrier stand into public square. Though that's also not really a bad thing to rely on. And that would be Irsu's campaign situation. Like, you want to get these Canaanite sellswords, Canaanite shield bearers. Basically, like, Kadesh will give you that kind of recruitment option over here through the native recruitment center. So if we're looking at the native recruitment center in Kadesh, you do start with sellswords and shield bearers at tier 2. And then at tier 3, you get veteran Canaanite swordsmen. And then at tier 4, you will get access to veteran shield bearers and renowned Canaanite swordsmen, as well as chariots and armored Syrian archers. That is a better like your faction-specific units are great in the late game. The native units, especially from Kadesh or Gubla, basically base territory, the coastal territories are the ones you want to use for much of the early game. Though, of course, you can always get a bunch of like regular units over here. Like, you know, I've gotten Nagib warriors over here, supported by warriors, all that. You know, sometimes you just gotta recruit what is available in a campaign, as opposed to what you may want to recruit in a campaign. And that would be it. Like, yeah, you can, like, if you want to play a campaign as Irsu where you burn everything to the ground, that's also a viable option, because you will benefit from the collapse of civilization. Though keep in mind, in order to win the campaign, you do need to take territory at the very least, some territory in a campaign, in order to be able to succeed over there. Anyway, Costin here, signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.